welcome. I arrived at 2 o'clock this morning, so I've been sitting here watching this session and enjoying some of the dialogue that's going off. Many of you might wonder why Microsoft is even here at a blockchain conference, and I'm going to try in this little presentation to bring to life why Microsoft is so interested in blockchain. And I'm delighted to be able to share the stage today with George from KPMG, who's going to come up a little bit later, and he's going to be talking about some of the ways that KPMG is already deploying blockchain technologies. So, you know, blockchain has enormous potential. And normally when I go to conferences, I end up starting out explaining blockchain to people. The great thing is, looking in this room, I think I'd be more or less wasting my time with that, which is really quite unusual. But I always start out by putting up the Mark Anderson quote around blockchain, focusing very specifically on Bitcoin, because the hype right now is all around Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, and you know, everything that I watched this morning, it was all very much focused in that space as well. And you know, if you go and you have a look at what the newspapers and the analysts are saying, they all sort of are fixated on cryptocurrencies. And I understand it, and I get it, and Microsoft gets it. But you know, the way that we look at blockchain is at a higher level. We actually think blockchain could be something fairly significant in the future. It could be something that could help us to remove friction in supply chains. It could be something that could help us to build a new form of distributed applications. You know, at a high level, we can think about Bitcoin as one application on top of blockchain as a framework, okay? So, you know, let's just go back to basics a little bit and explain why we believe that. We all know that blockchain, under the covers, has a secure, shared, distributed ledger. We've heard a lot of discussion about ledger technologies here today, okay? And that's very important, of course, for us. And I'm going to go quickly over these because I know most of you know this. I would normally spend about 10 minutes just explaining the whole concept of a ledger, explaining to people that it's, at its simplest form, a table, in many ways shared across the entire network rather than one individual owning that. Also, we would talk about the fact that in order to put things onto the ledger, you need to be able to verify and validate things so it's cryptographically secure. And normally that would be done if we're in a private network or a private blockchain, we'd be doing that, or a permission-based one, we'd be doing that using less onerous methods. If we're in a public one, such as Bitcoin or Ethereum, we'd be using proof of work, which, as we all know, is pretty computationally intensive. So, already talked about this. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to move on. So why does all this matter for business? And please excuse me if I've gone quickly over that first part. I don't want to bore you with basics. You know, business is built on trust, right? Everything we do in business is trust-based. We trust when we pass information about our customers to a third party that they'll use it correctly. We trust in our supply chain that people are handling our goods correctly and that they're moving them as agreed in contracts. We trust in the transfer of assets between people. But today, most of that trust is handled through manual verification processes in many cases. And we think that blockchain brings this enormous potential to really take out this intermediary phase for trust in business processes. So when Microsoft is looking at blockchain, we're actually thinking about how can we use this to build distributed applications using the blockchain as a single shared version of the truth that's cryptographically secure and shared, remove the friction, remove the third parties, and speed up business processes. But not only that, make it much easier to audit and understand what's going off inside of those business processes. And when there's a problem, be able to track, trace, and understand where that problem started and where the chain was actually broken. Okay? So for us, blockchain isn't just about cryptocurrency. So please don't think as I talk going forwards that cryptocurrency isn't important. I get it. And I see a lot of interest of people here. But at Microsoft, we see this as something that is going to fundamentally change the design pattern of applications and fundamentally change how business processes are built and engineered going forwards. So if it's so obvious, there's a simple question. If it's so obvious, why isn't everybody already using it today? Right? We're all sold on blockchain. Why aren't we just getting on with it? Well, the truth is, blockchain wasn't really built for the enterprise. Okay? When the people designed, when the original cryptocurrency-based transfer of value systems were set up, it wasn't really designed to be used in the enterprise. If you think about the distributed ledger as kind of a distributed database, right, which we're going to have a single shared version of the truth everybody is using, then it needs different properties to if it's being used in the way it is in a cryptocurrency setup. So, for example, ledgers designed in a public way generally lack performance. They're not very quick by definition. Okay? We just know that. We know it takes time for us to do the proof of work. By design, by the way, we know that transactions take time to commit and to be trusted. There's a lot of things going off behind there. We also know, for example, that in the smart contract world, you know, if you take a look at it, if you go into Ethereum, you have to use Solidity, to build a smart contract. You can't use C#, which all of the developers in the enterprise world know. If you go into Hyperledger Fabric, you're using some subset of Go. Again, something that isn't really designed for people inside of the enterprises. And then if you think about integration, most of these things don't integrate today with the third-party systems, the CRM systems, the ERP systems of organizations. And if we're going to start using this across organizations, we have to take blockchain off the island and integrate it together. So, really, there's tons of challenges in the blockchain world, and I'm going to address a few more in a second for the enterprise usage in our scenarios afterwards. But how do we build with blockchain? You know, when we go and talk to customers, we generally end up having 4 things that we talk to them about. The first one is, you know, does blockchain actually even apply to my scenario? And you would be amazed what people ask you to build on blockchain because it's the new hype, when it really doesn't need to be on blockchain. The next one is, which technology should I build on? Because there are hundreds of distributed ledger technologies out there now. It's crazy. There's a new one coming almost every week. The next one is, how do I translate the workflows, if we're talking about business processes and handovers, into smart contracts? And what issues do I run into in smart contracts in an enterprise setting, which is very different to other settings? And then, what does it take to build an application on top of this that connects into the rest of my enterprise? So the first question, as I said, is does it apply? And actually, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I know George is going to talk afterwards about this in more detail. But I wanted to say, you know, we already see blockchain applications across all industries. It isn't just financial services, it's all industries. But in general, we see 3 patterns of where blockchain makes sense. One is where we're doing asset transfer, right? So that's more the traditional type of thing that we see. The second one is where we have cross-organizational workflows. So not within a single company, but where multiple parties are working together, and we want to be able to exchange information about things through a supply chain, for example, over time. And the last one is where we've got the need for high assurance audit, where we really need to go down in detail and understand what's going off. And it's interesting, in the panel, the last question was around being able to track and trace money, and the answer was maybe we don't want to do that. Well, in fact, in enterprise, it's completely the opposite. We must be able to track and trace and understand what's going off and what's moving between organizations. Imagine when there was a recent outbreak of food poisoning. Because of the use of blockchain, we would be able to trace back exactly where that food came from through the supply chain, all the way back to where it was actually got into trouble, and we'd be able to trace back out exactly where all of the other foodstuffs went to, so that potentially we could avert problems elsewhere. So blockchain for us has this track and trace mentality, which is very different to the cryptocurrency world, but super important in the enterprise. So the second question is, what technology should I build on? Well, there's a lot, right? So the ones that are pretty general purpose are Hyperledger Fabric and Ethereum, of course. And then the ones that are maybe more specific to financial services, things like Quorum and Chain. Really, customers come to Microsoft almost daily with a different distributed ledger. There are so many of them. So our aim at Microsoft is not to make that choice for you, but to support as many of these as possible. Okay? The next thing is you need to deploy that technology, right? Because there's a lot of discussion about using it, but deploying and setting this thing up. So there are multiple different ways. There's the idea that you might want to do dev test, set up a little virtual machine, set up something, play around with it yourself very quickly, press a button, have it fire up. Don't deploy it all yourself. The second one is where you start looking at a single member, where you maybe simulate production and have multiple node access into a blockchain. And then the last one, where we're starting to get to now with some companies, is this multi-member, where we start collaborating across regions, across companies, and across geographies. So there are really three topologies that you move through as you get more mature and you want to get there. So these are also things we have to talk to companies about. But there's some big challenges. There are some big challenges. Scalability, as I mentioned. If you were to deploy a standard Ethereum setup today, you can maybe do 100 transactions a second if you're lucky. And that's really not good enough in the enterprise space. So what Microsoft has been working on is it's been working on something called the COCO framework. How many people have heard of the COCO framework? Do you mind? Not too many, okay. I'm not going to spend too long here because I don't have much time, and I could really talk for an hour just on COCO framework. But the COCO framework, the idea is to put a layer underneath of many of the existing blockchain distributed ledger technologies, where you can start to think about how you can remove this onerous need that you have in a public network in order to prove work and validity. So it's not proof of work, but how can we validate transactions and get the throughput and the latency down? And the COCO framework is a big piece of that. Okay, so already Ethereum enabled on COCO can do 1,600 transactions a second compared to 100. So we're making progress. It's still not up there with the database levels, but you know, we're going to get there. Confidentiality is another big issue. You know, if you look into the networks today, there's a lot of problems. People don't necessarily want people to know who is executing what, who's doing what, which transactions are running, and that's quite difficult today in a lot of the distributed ledgers that are out there. There are different types of ledgers with different types of constraints built in, but we really need to make that more rich and more flexible. And again, that's something that COCO is working on. And then the consortium governments, this is another big thing that we're working on. This is where we're trying to work out and build some structures in to allow you in an enterprise private consortium to actually better govern and manage who can be added into the consortium, who can be taken out, what their role is in the consortium, what they can see, and things like that. So this sits underneath of the other things. The next question is, okay, so how do I translate those things into smart contracts, the workflows and the business logic that I have? And again, I think most of you know what a smart contract is, but in the enterprise space, smart contracts suffer from some really quite big challenges. If you think about it, a smart contract by definition, first of all, they're all written in proprietary languages, so if you write a smart contract for Ethereum, you can't actually take it and use it in anything else. So you lock yourself straight into a blockchain straight away. The second thing is smart contracts by definition can't really do anything that's, let's say, private IP, because by definition, everybody on the network can look into the smart contract and understand your private IP. The next thing is they can't really call off-chain data, because if they do, that sort of breaks the whole principle of trust that's in the blockchain. The smart contract's stored in the blockchain. It should only operate on data in the blockchain. And the last thing, which becomes a bigger issue, is they can't actually really do heavy processing because they're restricted in what they can execute simply because everybody on the network has to execute those things. Okay, so they've got a lot of challenges on scale. There's a lot of challenges on security. So as soon as you start working with smart contracts in the enterprise space, you run into all sorts of challenges. And we are doing work on that. You'll see, if you go and do some searching around something called cryptlets, what we're working on is a trusted execution environment, which is hardware-based with signing and cryptographic security based in, where you'll be able to basically move your business logic off of the actual blockchain, which will allow you to do heavy lifting. If you want to do machine learning on things, if you want to call out, you'll be able to do that. So we're doing a lot of work there. This is flashing here. It said 15 minutes, but I have 20, so I'm just going to ignore it. So basically here, what we're doing is we're moving things off of the blockchain where possible, but trying to maintain the integrity and security of the network through cryptlets. And that's something new that we're innovating on. So the message here is, from a perspective of Microsoft, we look at blockchain for the enterprise, and we're running into challenges that you don't run into when you do things in cryptography. In cryptocurrency. Got cryptography on my mind. So the last question is, so now I've got all of this. Imagine we've solved this problem. We've got a good scenario. We've decided which ledger we're going to use. We've somehow worked through these scalability challenges and the security challenges and governance, and I've got an app. I want to build this app, and now I want to connect it to the rest of my company. You know, blockchain is like an island. I think about it as a desert island. It's kind of always isolated in most places, unless somebody does a lot of work, custom coding and bringing things together. Heck, even building an application on top of blockchain isn't the easiest thing in the world. Okay? If you want to start connecting that into an SAP system or a Dynamics system, you can imagine that that's quite difficult. So one of the things that we are working on are bridges, things to allow you to get from the blockchain ledger island into the enterprise space where we're running today. So if we take a look top to bottom, this is actually the Microsoft story when it comes to blockchain. And I hope that what I've managed to do here is just give you a feel that when we talk blockchain in the enterprise, and George is going to talk use cases, so I haven't done that here on purpose to avoid duplication. When we talk blockchain in the enterprise, there are different challenges to cryptocurrency. But Microsoft is super committed to helping to resolve those challenges, no matter which platform you run on, because we really think this is important. So down in the bottom right here, as you look at it, you'll see hosted VMs. That's more your traditional virtual machines where you can go and run anything you want, control all your own infrastructure. To the left, as you look at it, are managed distributed ledgers. At the bottom here, you see the Cocoa framework that you can or can't use. We will actually open source the Cocoa framework on GitHub in early 2018, so anybody will be able to get to it. It's in general preview right now, and we've got many companies working with us. Then the middleware, we heard about identity and management of people. That's something we're working on too, so that we can do authentication and authorization in a different way. How do we get connectivity to machine learning and reporting? Secure off-chain execution is the cryptlets discussion that I talked about earlier. Monitoring and security, third-party services, and then up the stack. So when Microsoft looks at this, we don't look at it as just the ledger in isolation, although we know we've got challenges there we're trying to address as part of consortiums. But we also look at it as how can we build and develop that entire ecosystem needed to deliver enterprise applications. And with that, I'm going to hand over to George, who's going to come up and talk about some of the use cases, and then I'll be back at the end. Okay, George.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning to everyone. Coming from KPMG, I come from, let's say, the business point of view, although I'm an IT guy, I'm an engineer as a background. And basically, we're extremely excited because we always try to provide value to the customers. And what Mark just showed is the extent of the application that we can use blockchain technologies to solve business issues. And everybody knows this. And everybody knows that we do have a lot of challenges, and Mark described them very well. But I think that the solutions will be coming very soon. And again, the last slide showed that we are working towards that direction. and the world of opportunity will suddenly be so big that we will not be able to catch up. I think that businesses are behind, not technology. We have the technology toys, they're there, they're ready for us to play. We need to solve problems. So from a business point of view, companies like KPMG, and I speak on behalf of KPMG, but I'm sure everybody else, yes, we are the big four, the boring auditing firms, but the solutions that can be brought to our clients are so many for business transformation that things are extremely exciting. So let's talk a bit about Mark and George, Microsoft and KPMG alliance. What do you need for a successful adoption of a blockchain solution or a blockchain technology? You need the industry players, the technology people, business best practices, and all those resources and infrastructures, just as Mark said now, to be brought together, and the regulators. And we're working on those. So why is Microsoft and KPMG having this alliance? I will put it in a different way. Mark was flying last night. I have been extremely busy. He has been extremely busy. We both developed 2 presentations that we had to bring together. And surprisingly enough, they were extremely aligned. Why? Because at the company level, we look at this from the same point of view. We want to solve enterprise problems. Cryptocurrency is great. It's not my field. I don't know how to talk about it, but getting somebody like Microsoft, somebody like KPMG can help to solve the enterprise problems. And something else that it's important, this is a marketing slide, I understand that, and I will be quick. When you Google KPMG or Microsoft, you'll find 1 million alliances. It's like a mesh of alliances. But this is the real thing. I've been to the launch event in Seattle. This is the real thing. We have seen it working. So going forward, how do we approach creating a blockchain solution? Basically, you need to have a strategy. You need to prioritize things. But most importantly, the use case. You don't take technology and try to find something. You need to find a use case. You need to create the value for that use case. You need to give the value to the shareholders. You need to excite your customers. You need to get your workforce on board. So the use case has to be real. We have to go to production. And this alliance basically combines KPMG's business and other specialization, including some of our data engineering specialized solutions, and Microsoft to be the blockchain as a service provider. The focus is on financial services. Mark said that's not the only focus, and I agree, but why do we focus on financial services? Dozens of players, billions of users. You can get the scale that you need if you solve the scalability issues that Mark said before. So there's a lot of focus there. A lot of the use cases are in financial services. But some strange use cases. Food supply chain. How do we track that a carrot is organic? Right now, you buy it, and you have to trust who is selling it. If it's Whole Foods in the US, you have a good opportunity, but then sometimes you may find out that that's not the true case. Diamond industry. How do we track each diamond's unique attributes, and then we buy it and we pay for it? Music piracy. I was in the US when Napster came online, but we can track how the transaction for a specific music file are performed, and then we can know if it's pirated or not. So the business applications are huge. I think I'm more excited than most people in KPMG about this, but that's good that I'm here. So how do we approach this? You really need to qualify the business case. And we have a simple model. It's no brain surgery or nuclear science, but it makes sense. Is it a business critical process? Does it have low levels of end-to-end automation? Does it require intermediates, third parties to come together? Is it eligible for dematerialization to get rid of all those points of manual work or excess work or double work? And can it be scalable while avoiding risk? And scalability is definitely an issue. Mark talked about it before. That's why it's in our method of qualifying a business case. So let's look at one business case that has been put into practice, the funds DLT project. Basically, it was a model, a use case to apply to the as-is ecosystem of funds order processing and enhancing the value chain. And something important, the as-is ecosystem. We want to take a step. We don't want to disrupt everything because that's how we achieve adoption. So basically, we brought the different stakeholders together, including the Luxembourg Stock Exchange. We brought the different stakeholders together, linked them, created a platform that automates the clearing and settlement process, the activities of the transfer agent, while allowing the asset managers to have real-time view of the information they need. To understand the value, let's look at the value chain of the funds ordering process and all of the costs and the stakeholders that are involved. And this is not an animation error. I start from the middle because that's where you have the clearing and settlement house, because they are always in the center of everything that is become a serial process. But you also have the investors, you have the distributors performing AML KYC, you have the fund platform, then the clearing house, then the transfer agent, again performing AML and other similar transactions, activities. You have the custodians, and then in the end, the asset manager. What has been done is getting the existing model that basically has a lot of inefficiencies and changing it to be a much more efficient, practical, real-time, and transparent model. Transparency is important because you need to get the regulator on side. At the bottom of the slide, I highlight that it's not only the fact that it's more efficient that drives this, it's also the regulation that is coming, because we had a panel about regulation before, but that was about regulating the specific technology, the specific applications, or the cryptocurrency. There are other regulations that are actually pushing for these types of technology. For example, MiFID. MiFID, most of you know it. I don't know it in detail. I'm not a regulatory expert, but I know that my colleagues are freaking out about it, excuse my language. I know that it's going to change the way stakeholders interact. I know it's going to change the way money is being made. So this was taken into consideration when developing the platform, the FATS DLT, where basically we provide the solution to manage the fund transactions, but at the same time, something important that Mark pointed out before, the way to connect to the platform. We don't solve all the problems, so it's not end-to-end big solution, but it connects the investors, the advisors, the asset managers. There's an element of a robot advisor too, and the distributors. How did we get it done? The Luxembourg Stock Exchange was on board, of course. We need them. They did a lot more than the bullets say there, but that's the highlights. We had a technology partner that basically developed the APIs, the underlying technology, developed the smart contract technology base, and everything else that you need to make a use case real. And then KPMG, I'm from KPMG, so I made the list longer to show that we did more. Basically, we managed the use case, the go-to-market, the business model, we manage the relationships, we manage how to get everybody on board with accepting this change. This is a slide that most people in KPMG are proud of because they're saying, look at how many people we got in the observation committee. You don't need to read it, it's a lot. I think there's more actually, I think these are the main. It's a good thing, you brought stakeholders on board and we need to do that. But I think going forward, use cases have to be a bit more simple. Getting so many people on board was one of the negative highlights of the project, that it made it complicated. Making decisions was not as fast as we needed. But we managed to get a lot of big names to get on board and support this. Some other examples, banking, capital markets, asset management, insurance, and other functional use cases. You see that they're from different countries. It's all over the place. It's happening. I think that we are at a turning point. As soon as we solve some of the technology problems that Mark was saying, and we get the regulators on board, this will explode. This is, as everybody says, bigger than the internet, but you can use the internet without a use case. You need a use case, a specific, managed, structured use case to get value out of this. And I know it sounds boring, but this is from practical experience. So basically, it's about seizing the new potential in a structured way. You need partners that understand technology and business, and you need to get your ecosystem together. I will hand over back to Mark to finish. Thank you.
I arrived in the blockchain world from the analytics, AI, and IoT world. That's where I've spent 20 years of my career working with data and analytics and helping companies solve pretty complex problems. And I'm fascinated by what blockchain can bring to the table. And I think everybody in this room, because of your understanding of blockchain, you have a massive leg up on this enterprise journey as well. So don't just constrain your thinking of blockchain into the cryptocurrency world. I think, look, we're committed to this journey. We now have a very extensive team working on blockchain. We're building great partnerships with people like KPMG. It's superb to be here working together and supporting a conference with the University of Nicosia, who themselves are pioneers in the use of some of this technology. And for me, what we're trying to do is enable organizations to have blockchain on their terms. That means in the cloud or on-premise. It means in whatever topology they want. It means running enterprise-wide with whichever ledger they choose to run with. It means helping to integrate them with their business, and lastly, making sure that we can deliver that with enterprise assurance. Now, one thing I haven't spoken about today, but I just want to bring to your attention, is we've developed an application called the Azure Blockchain Application Builder. And what it lets you do is very quickly spin up POCs. I'm going to include a link on the next slide. If you go and take a click, you can go through. You'll get the slides afterwards, I hope. And from there, you can actually go and get a copy of this tool. And if you then want to fire up something on Azure, it will actually let you supply smart contracts and other things, and it will spin up an entire end-to-end service with a basic web GUI on that you can use in POCs to try and show and prove out the value of certain use cases. So with that, what I think I'd like to do, we've got 5 minutes left. George, if you'd like to come back up here, we can see if there's any questions from the audience. We've got about 5 minutes, so if anybody's got any questions, I'd love to take them. So just wait for the microphone to come to you. Fantastic.
Are Microsoft's blockchain solutions completely decentralized or can be deployed in that way? And the second question is it open source?
So the Cocoa framework will be open source on GitHub as of next year. The rest of what you've seen there generally is already open source, right? So it depends on the ledger that you're taking and the technology. But otherwise, yes, the intention is not to create proprietary pieces, although some of that middleware may start out being proprietary until we build it up and get it up and running. In terms of being decentralized, that depends a lot on your topology and how you deploy it, I think. Yes, it is possible, but it depends on your topology and how you deploy. Any other questions? There's one back over here.
Thank you. So you said that Microsoft wants to build an entire ecosystem for enterprises to enable them to approach blockchain. So you want to provide different services and different layers to provide a full blockchain solution that adapts to the needs of enterprises. But one of the main points of a blockchain is to reduce trust into intermediaries and into third parties. So I'm wondering if you are the only provider of a blockchain system and all the blockchain elements, so enterprises aren't indeed trusting Microsoft.
So no, I think if you deploy a distributed ledger technology, Microsoft is not involved at all. We're just the infrastructure hosting that technology, right? We can't see into it any more than you can, depending on how it's deployed. And we'd be really naive to think we'll be the only player in this space. We already see other enterprise players spinning up to support exactly these same use cases. So I think you will have a choice. But things that we're trying to build, things like the COCO framework that we're trying to develop, they're going to allow you to port things between blockchains, which will give you more flexibility to move between distributed ledger systems, which you don't really have today with some of the technologies. So I think it's probably quite the opposite. I think, Microsoft is a company who's been founded and has spent most of its existence in providing a platform to allow other people to build things, to empower other people to build things, to do things better. And a great example of that is KPMG. We provide the platform. KPMG brings the expertise with other systems integrators to build those applications for customers.
Actually, if I may add something to that, I fully agree with Mark. Microsoft is taking the opposite direction to what you just described, actually, and that's very important for us. Because, as I said, it's a mesh of alliances. It's not just one.
I think there's a really key thing here. No one company can ever hope to run the entire ecosystem, right? Even if we look at Microsoft, we've got our Dynamics product, but if we go into an enterprise company and SAP is their ERP system of choice, we have to work with that. So we'll provide the connectors to work to that as well. So I think actually, it's a good question, but I think actually at the end of the day, we're really about being as open and transparent as we can, and then as we solve problems that are important in the enterprise space, we're trying really, really hard to make that generally available, that anybody can pick it up, rather than just for us. So, and COCO is a great example of that early next year. I think we've got time for one more, and then we have to stop because it's flashing here. I think the gentleman with the checked shirt.
There will be any coordination, let's say, with Oracle or SQL system regarding for this, because they are like the leaders in this database system and ledger?
So coordination with Oracle, well, Oracle can join the same alliances and they can pick up the COCO framework and they can pull the code off GitHub and reuse it. So in that sense, yes. In terms of with SQL, I mean, Microsoft makes SQL. So of course that's integrated into our stack, but we would provide a bridge into SQL. One way that you might see that being used is to store content in the cryptlet world off blockchain, some of the bigger content, and have that cryptographically secured and accessible off the blockchain so it doesn't have to live permanently inside of the blockchain. But I think that there's going to be a lot of developments. We're still early, right? Let's just be honest. Microsoft's been on this journey for 3 years or so, right? That's about the length of time that we've really been working on it. We've been public for a while. Recently, we've seen Oracle go live with something, IBM go live with something, SAP's doing something. So they're all coming out of the woodwork now. And we will all have to share at some stage. But, we're also commercial companies, so we also want to make a profit, which means selling some of our stuff. Okay. All right. With that, I hope that that's a different spin on the enterprise space. Please feel free to reach out to KPMG. If you've got any local businesses thinking about using blockchain, they'd be delighted to help out. And if you've got any other questions for Microsoft, then I'll be around for the rest of today, and I'd love to take them. So thank you very much.
Thank you.